The oatmeal was already bubbling when Adaeze heard Zuri padding down the hallway in her socks. October light came through the kitchen window at a low angle, the kind that made everything look considered, deliberate. It caught the blazer hanging on the closet door across the room. A deep charcoal wool she had found at a consignment shop on Mercer Street, pressed the night before until the lapels lay flat and exact. On the refrigerator, a post-it note in her own handwriting. "This is the one." Zuri climbed onto her chair without being asked and pulled the bowl toward her. 6 years old and already self-sufficient in the small ways that made Adaeze proud and sad in equal measure. "Is today a sending day or a waiting day?" Zuri asked. Adaeze stirred the oatmeal once before setting it down. "A waiting day, baby." The laptop was open on the table. The Harwick Lorne Capital Group application portal had confirmed receipt 14 days ago. Submission successful. Your application is under review. She had read that line 11 times in the first week. She had stopped counting after that. She had not always been a woman who counted, but 8 years in finance had taught her that data does not lie even when people do, and she had learned to track everything. Her resume documented a career that had been built without shortcuts. A bachelor's in economics from State, a certified financial analyst designation earned on her second attempt while Zuri was still in diapers, a second certification in risk analysis completed the year after. She had spent 4 of those 8 years at Meridian Asset Partners, where she had been promoted twice, and where her final performance review used the word exceptional without qualification. She had left references who answered their phones. She had written a cover letter for Harwick Lorne that was 3 paragraphs long, specific, and precise. She had done everything she had been told to do. The silence from Harwick Lorne had a particular quality. It was not the silence of a decision being carefully made. She had learned the difference. This was the silence of a door that had already closed before she reached it. Smooth, seamless, leaving no seam to press against. She had felt it before, in smaller rooms, at smaller tables. She recognized its texture the way you recognize a smell from childhood, immediately, completely, in the body before the mind. She did not say any of this to Zuri. She kissed the top of her daughter's head, packed her lunch, and walked her to the corner where the school bus stopped. On the way back she passed the dry cleaner, the check-cashing place, the church with the painted mural on its east wall. Her zip code was 48214. She had lived here for 6 years. She did not apologize for it on her resume, because there was nothing to apologize for, but she had begun, in the last 2 weeks, to wonder. She sat down at the kitchen table that afternoon, with a clean document open and her application materials beside it. She worked methodically, the way she did everything. She took her resume, every credential, every role, every date, and she changed 2 things. The name at the top, the address. Adaeze Okafor became Allison Hartley. East Side 4824 Feen became Millbrook Township 48301, a suburb she had driven through once, where the houses had 3-car garages and the elementary school had a rated capacity it had never reached. Everything else was identical. The 8 years, the certifications, the exceptional, the 3-paragraph cover letter, word for word. She submitted it at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday. She did not sleep well that night. She lay beside Zuri, who had climbed into her bed at some point after midnight, and she listened to her daughter breathe and told herself she was running an experiment. That experiments required emotional neutrality, that she did not already know the answer, The response arrived at 5:52 p.m. on Saturday, 47 hours later. Dear Allison, we were impressed by your background and would love to schedule an initial conversation with our talent acquisition team at your earliest convenience. Adaeze read it once. Then she opened her inbox and found the Harwick and Lorne thread for her own application. Still nothing. No rejection. No acknowledgement. The particular silence, still in place, undisturbed. She sat very still. The oatmeal from that morning was still on the stove, forgotten. The October light had gone flat and gray by then, the window giving back nothing. She positioned the two emails side by side on the screen. Adaeze Okafor. Silence. 14 days deep, with no bottom. Allison Hartley. An invitation, warm and prompt, arriving in under 2 days. She read them again, not because she needed to, because she wanted to be certain she was not constructing something that wasn't there. She was a financial analyst. She understood the difference between a pattern and a data point. This was one data point. She knew that. But she also knew what she felt sitting in that kitchen with the cold oatmeal and the gray light and her daughter's crayon drawing still on the corner of the table. A figure in a cape labeled Mommy at Work. The letters uneven and enormous and absolutely sure of themselves. She knew what she felt, and she had learned, over 34 years, to trust that particular feeling, not because it was infallible, but because it had never once been wrong. She closed the laptop, not quickly, with the deliberate care of someone securing evidence. Then she picked up her phone and called one person. Brenique arrived at 7:30 on a Sunday morning, with 2 coffees and a wire-bound notebook already open to the 3rd page. She set the coffees on the kitchen table without asking where Adaeze wanted them, sat down, clicked her pen, and said, "Walk me through exactly what you did." That was how the investigation began, not with outrage, with methodology. Brenique had spent 4 years covering housing discrimination and predatory lending for a regional investigative outlet. She understood how patterns disappeared the moment you tried to describe them without numbers. Anecdote is what they call it when they want to dismiss you, she said, drawing a line down the center of a notebook page. We are not going to give them that option. On the left side, she wrote, variables we control. On the right, variables we isolate. The only variable they would not control was the one that should never have mattered at all. They designed the methodology over 3 hours and 2 rounds of coffee. Matched resume pairs, identical qualifications, identical formatting, identical years of experience, identical certifications. The only differences were name and zip code. Adaeze Okafor, East Side zip code, versus Allison Hartley, suburban zip code. They built 6 pairs, then 12, rotating submission dates to prevent pattern detection, spacing applications across a 6-week window. Brenique had covered enough discrimination cases to know that timing mattered as much as content. We document everything, she said. Timestamps, response language, whether they use your first name or your full name, whether the tone shifts. Adaeze was already building the spreadsheet before Brenique finished the sentence. Loretta came by that evening to take Zuri for a sleepover. She stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching Adaeze at the laptop, and then she did something Adaeze had not expected. She went to her bag, the wide canvas one she carried everywhere, and she took out a folder. It was the kind that had once been deep burgundy, now faded to something closer to rust. She set it on the edge of the table without opening it. 30 years, Loretta said. That was all. Adaeze opened the folder after her mother left. Inside, Rejection letters on institutional letterhead, some typed, some printed, the oldest ones in fonts that no longer existed. 30 years of the same silence, given different signatures. She closed it carefully and set it beside the laptop. It stayed there for the rest of the investigation. The spreadsheet grew. By week 3, they had 22 matched pairs and 44 applications in the system. By week 5, 47 pairs. 94 applications submitted to Harwick and Lorne and 11 other firms in the region, because Brenique had insisted on scope. One company is a story, she said. Multiple companies is a system. Adaeze color-coded the response column, green for interview invitation, yellow for automated acknowledgement, red for silence. The red accumulated with a consistency that made her stomach tighten every time she opened the file. She was still job searching. That did not stop. It could not stop. The rent notice arrived on a Thursday. Not a warning, just the monthly reminder. But it sat on the counter with a particular weight that week. There was a position at a regional accounting firm, mid-level, less than she was worth, and she came within one phone call of accepting it. She had the number pulled up on her phone at 11:15 on a Tuesday night. Zuri asleep down the hall. The apartment quiet except for the sound of her own breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. She sat with it for 4 minutes. Then she put the phone down and went back to the spreadsheet. Zuri found her there most mornings. "Mommy, why do you send so many emails?" she asked one Wednesday, climbing onto the chair beside her, still in pajamas with the small dinosaurs on them. Adaeze looked at her daughter's face, the wide, certain eyes, the way she asked questions as though she expected answers that made sense, and said, "I'm counting something." Zuri considered this. "What are you counting?" Adaeze thought for a moment. "Whether a door is locked," she said, "or just closed." Zuri accepted this with the particular trust of a child who has not yet learned to distrust her mother's explanations. She went and got her crayons and sat at the other end of the table, drawing, while Adaeze worked. There was a school permission form in Adaeze's bag that she had not signed yet. She signed it that morning before Zuri finished her oatmeal. 12 weeks after Adaeze had first sent the matched pair, Adaeze Okafor and Allison Hartley, the same woman in every way that should have mattered, Brenique ran the full statistical analysis. She did it at Adaeze's kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon, while Loretta had Zuri at the park. She had her laptop open and a legal pad beside it, and she worked without speaking for 40 minutes. When she stopped, she did not say anything immediately. She looked at the numbers. Then she looked at Adaeze. 67%, she said. Black-sounding names receive interview offers at a rate 67% lower than matched white-sounding names. P-value less than 0.001. She turned the laptop so Adaeze could see it. That means there is less than a 1 in 1,000 chance this is random. She printed the spreadsheet. The printer on the counter ran for nearly a minute, page after page. The accumulated record of 94 applications and 12 weeks of documented silence. Brenique stacked the pages, squared the edges against the table, and slid them across to Adaeze. Adaeze looked at the spreadsheet for a long time. Every row a name. Every red cell a door that had been locked before anyone looked up to see who was knocking. Loretta's folder sat at the edge of the table, the faded burgundy cover patient and still. She looked up. "We need a lawyer before we publish anything," she said. Brenique nodded. "I know exactly who to call." Celestine Otto arrived at Brenique's office on a Tuesday morning with a canvas tote bag, a thermos of tea, and no interest in small talk. She settled into the chair across from Adaeze, lifted the reading glasses from the beaded chain at her collarbone, and placed them on her face. Then she picked up the spreadsheet. She did not speak for 3 full minutes. Adaeze counted. She had learned, sitting in enough rooms where her competence was being assessed, not to fill silence with reassurance. She let Celestine read. The October light came through the office window at a low angle, catching the dust on the blinds. Brenique stood at the counter with her notebook, not writing anything. Celestine set the spreadsheet down. Who built the methodology? We did, Adaeze said. Together. Brenique designed the statistical framework. I designed the test pairs. Celestine looked at Brenique. P-value less than 0.001. Confirmed twice, Brenique said. Different sampling windows. Celestine removed her glasses and let them hang. This is the cleanest documentation I have seen in 4 years. She paused. That is not a compliment yet. That is a starting point. What followed was 2 weeks of meetings, most of them at Celestine's office, on the 12th floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old case files. She walked them through the documentation the way a surgeon walks through a preoperative checklist. What was solid? What was circumstantial? What could not be used? The response timestamps were solid. The matched resume pairs were solid. The statistical analysis was solid. The circumstantial piece was the mechanism. They could prove the pattern. They could not yet prove what was producing it. A pattern without a mechanism, Celestine explained, was a story. A pattern with a mechanism was a case. She made the call on a Thursday afternoon. Her contact was a man named Deshaun Pittard, 31 years old, former HR coordinator at Harwick Lorne. He had left 8 months ago after raising concerns internally about the applicant screening software. His manager at the time, a direct report to Prescott Vane, had told him his concerns were outside his scope. He had put his concerns in writing anyway. He had kept a copy. Deshaun met them at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Celestine's office. He was quiet in the way of someone who had rehearsed being quiet. He ordered nothing. He slid a manila envelope across the table and kept his hand on it for a moment before releasing it. Inside was a printed internal memo, dated 14 months prior, addressed to the firm's technology vendor. It described the screening algorithm's filtering criteria in the language of optimization. One variable was listed as community fit assessment. The definition, embedded in a footnote, read, applicants residing in zip codes with median household income below designated threshold or with community composition indices outside established benchmarks. Adaeze read the footnote twice. The language was careful and bloodless and precise. It meant, if you live where you live, you do not get through. He knew, Adaeze said. She was not asking. Celestine nodded. The algorithm was doing the discrimination, so no individual had to sign their name to it. The next meeting was the longest. Celestine laid out the legal landscape with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything. Disparate impact doctrine did not require proof of intent. It required proof of effect. The memo was the mechanism. The spreadsheet was the effect. The EEOC process was administrative, not judicial, but it created a formal record and triggered an obligation to respond. A complaint was not a lawsuit. It was a declaration, made under oath, that something had happened and that it could be documented. If the EEOC found cause, the pressure that followed would be institutional. If Harwick and Lorne chose litigation over settlement, they would be choosing to put the algorithm on trial. "What happens to Deshawn?" Adaeze asked. "He has already left the firm," Celestine said. "His memo predates our investigation. His participation is voluntary and documented." Adaeze drove home that evening in the particular silence of someone carrying something she has not yet set down. Zuri was asleep when she got in. Loretta was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the television murmuring low in the other room. Adaeze sat down across from her and did not say anything for a moment. "I keep thinking about what it costs," she said finally. "If this goes public, my name on it. I still don't have a job, Mama. I'm still applying. If I become the woman who sued a firm, if that's what shows up when someone searches my name—" Loretta wrapped both hands around her mug. "You think I didn't think about that every time I decided to stay quiet?" Adaeze looked at the folder at the edge of the table. The faded burgundy cover, 30 years of ink. "I stayed quiet," Loretta said, and the folder got thicker. The final meeting before they moved forward was short. Celestine spread the documentation across the conference table in organized sections. The spreadsheet, the matched resume pairs, the response logs, the memo, Deshawn's signed statement. She looked at it the way you look at something you have built and are deciding whether it will hold. "You asked me once what the goal was," she said to Adaeze. "I want to be clear. The goal is not a settlement. The goal is a record that cannot be dismissed, in a forum that cannot be ignored, before the story runs." She reached into the canvas tote and placed a single sheet of paper on the table in front of Adaeze. It was a draft. At the top, in plain block text, was Adaeze's name. Below it, the words, "Formal Complaint of Employment Discrimination," and below that, the name of the respondent, Harwick and Lorne Capital Group. Adaeze had carried doubt into every room she had ever entered. She understood now that the doubt had never been hers to begin with. Someone had handed it to her at the door. "Your name on this," Celestine said, "is not a liability. It is the point." Adaeze picked up the pen. The article went live at 7:04 a.m., 4 minutes behind schedule because Brenique had read the opening paragraph one final time and changed a single word. She had written that the algorithm overlooked black applicants. She changed it to removed. Then she pressed publish from her kitchen table, and the screen went still for 1 full second before the page resolved, and the headline sat there in plain black text against white. The algorithm that filters out black applicants, inside one firm's hiring bias. She called Adaeze immediately. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "It's up," Brenique said. "I know," Adaeze said. "I'm looking at it." Adaeze was standing in Loretta's kitchen in her socks. Zuri still asleep in the back bedroom, the smell of oatmeal on the stove, and October light coming through the window at a low, particular angle that made everything look like it was being documented. She had read the article the night before, and the night before that, and still her name in the second paragraph felt like something physical. Adaeze Okafor, our senior financial analyst. She put her phone face down on the counter and stirred the oatmeal and breathed. Harwick and Lorne's statement arrived at 9:17 a.m. Celestine forwarded it without comment. The language was exact in the way of something that had been reviewed by multiple attorneys before transmission. The firm was committed to equitable and inclusive hiring practices. The methodology described in the article was deeply flawed and did not reflect the complexity of the firm's candidate evaluation process. The conclusions drawn were irresponsible and damaging to an institution that had long championed diversity in financial services. Prescott Vane's comment ran separately. 3 sentences, quoted in a follow-up post Bernique published within the hour. This is an unfair characterization of a rigorous and equitable process. Our screening tools are applied consistently and without bias. We take these allegations seriously and will review the claims through the appropriate internal channels. Process. Rigorous, appropriate channels. The words arrived like furniture arranged to block a doorway. By 10 a.m., the matched resume data had been screenshotted and shared 8,000 times. An HR director in Atlanta posted the side-by-side comparison of Adaeze Okafor and Allison Hartley and wrote, "I have been trying to explain this to my leadership team for 3 years. Here it is. This is the evidence." A law professor at a state university shared the internal memo, the one with community fit in the filtering criteria, and simply wrote, "This is a legal document now." Black professionals across industries began sharing their own silences, the applications that vanished, the interviews that never came, the names they had considered changing and hadn't, the names they had changed and had. Bernique's share counter climbed past 40,000 before noon. At 12:43 p.m., Adaeze was watching the regional midday broadcast on Loretta's television when the anchor, a woman named Patricia Sowell, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, held up a printed copy of the article and said, "A local woman's documented experiment is raising serious questions about automated hiring systems at one of the city's most prominent wealth management firms." Adaeze Okafor, a certified financial analyst and mother of 1, submitted identical resumes under 2 different names. Loretta, sitting in the armchair across the room with her coffee, said quietly, "There's your name." Adaeze did not respond. She was watching Patricia Sowell say her name on television, and she was thinking about the silence, the original one, the one that had arrived in her inbox 8 weeks ago and weighed nothing and everything at once. At 3:08 p.m., Celestine released the EEOC complaint to the press. The filing was 27 pages. It included the spreadsheet, the response logs, the matched resume pairs, and the internal memo from Deshaun Pittard's time at the firm, the one that named zip code as a community fit variable in the algorithmic screening layer. Celestine had attached a 2-page legal analysis explaining precisely why this constituted a pattern of disparate impact discrimination under Title VII. She had also attached Deshaun's signed statement. The complaint named Harwick Lorne Capital Group as respondent. It named Adaeze Okafor as complainant. It named the algorithm. The regional business wire picked it up in 11 minutes. By 6 p.m., 3 women had contacted Bernique directly through the article's tip line. Their names were Monique, Jasmine, and a woman who asked to remain anonymous for now, but said she had applied to Harwick Lorne twice in 18 months and had kept every timestamp, every confirmation email, every record of her qualifications. Monique had a master's degree and 7 years in portfolio management. Jasmine had applied from a zip code 2 blocks east of Adaeze's. All 3 had received nothing. Not a rejection, not an acknowledgement, the particular silence, its texture familiar. Bernique called Adaeze at 6:22 p.m. "There are 3 more," she said. Adaeze sat down at Loretta's kitchen table. "How many more do you think there are?" "I think," Bernique said carefully, "that we are going to find out." Zuri had fallen asleep on the couch with her shoes still on. One arm draped over a throw pillow, her breath slow and even. Loretta had covered her with the blue blanket from the hall closet. The television was off now. The kitchen was quiet in a way that was entirely different from the silence of 8 weeks ago. That silence had been an erasure. This one was a held breath. Adaeze looked at the share counter on her phone. 63,000. She thought about the blazer, still hanging on the closet door at her apartment, still unworn, still waiting for an interview that had never come. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at it for one full second. She answered. "Ms. Okafor," the voice said. "This is the office of the State Labor Committee. We'd like to speak with you about your testimony." The audit results came back on a Wednesday, 6 weeks after the article published. Adaeze read them on her phone, standing in the parking lot of the grocery store, Zuri in the cart inside with Loretta. And the number sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong. 3.4 times. Over 4 years, the algorithm had filtered out black applicants at the initial screening stage at a rate 3.4 times higher than white applicants, with equivalent qualifications. The mechanism was documented. The disparity was not statistical noise. The independent firm, hired under regulatory pressure, used the word irrefutable in its executive summary, which was the same word Celestine had used 8 weeks earlier, sitting at her kitchen table with Adaeze's matched resumes spread between them. Prescott Vane was placed on administrative leave 2 days later. The announcement came in a press release at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday, which is when institutions release things they hope will be forgotten by Monday. 2 senior HR personnel followed within the week. The language in each announcement was careful, bloodless, procedural, consistent with ongoing review, pending further evaluation. The language did what it was designed to do, which was to make accountability sound like paperwork. Celestine forwarded each release to Adaeze with a single line, noted and filed. The algorithm was deactivated on a Thursday. There was no press release for that. A single sentence buried in a regulatory filing, the kind of document that takes a trained eye to find. Brenique found it. She texted Adaeze a screenshot and wrote, "It's gone." Adaeze read it 3 times. It was a small, procedural sentence. It was also 4 years of applications that would never be returned. 4 years of names and zip codes and silences that the sentence could not undo. She saved the screenshot to the folder on her phone labeled Documentation, which by then had 214 items in it. The job offer arrived the following Tuesday by certified letter, which Adaeze thought was a particular kind of irony. Senior Financial Analyst, Harwick Lorne Capital Group. The exact role. The salary was listed. It was good. She read the letter twice, set it on the kitchen table, and called Celestine. They met that evening at Loretta's house, all 4 of them, Adaeze, Celestine, Brenique, and Loretta, who set coffee in front of everyone without asking. Zuri was asleep in the back room. The letter sat in the center of the table. "They want the story to end here," Celestine said. "1 woman, 1 job. Resolution." "It's a good job," Brenique said, not as an argument, as a fact that deserved to be named. "It is," Adaeze said. Loretta wrapped both hands around her mug and did not say anything yet. "If you take it," Celestine said, "the story becomes about what you individually recovered. It does not become about what the system did to everyone. It filtered out before you thought to document it. Monique does not have a job offer. Jasmine does not. The woman who kept every timestamp does not." Adaeze looked at the letter. 8 years of experience, 8 years of doing everything right. The salary was real. The stability it represented was real. Zuri's school supplies were real, and the gap in her own savings account was real, and the smaller firm that had reached out 2 weeks ago with a decent offer she had not yet answered was real. "I know what it costs," Celestine said quietly. Loretta set her mug down. "The folder I showed you," she said to Adaeze. 30 years of those letters. I kept them because I thought someday someone would ask." She paused. "Nobody asked." Adaeze looked at her mother for a long moment. Then she looked at the Harwick and Lorne letter. Then she picked it up and set it to the side of the table, not in the center anymore. "I'm declining," she said. The 6 weeks had cost things she had not fully accounted for in advance. The harassment had started the day the article published and had not stopped. Her name in comment sections, her address posted once before Brenique's editor got it removed, the emails that arrived with no subject line. She had stopped reading them after the 2nd week. She had also stopped sleeping well, which Zuri noticed by the way children notice the things they are not told, coming into Adaeze's room at 2 a.m., twice to ask if everything was okay. There was a night in the 5th week when Adaeze sat on the edge of her bed and watched Zuri sleep and asked herself the question plainly. Was this worth it? Not the investigation, not the article, not the audit. Just this specific version of it. This specific cost, this specific life she was living, while the institutions recalibrated and the news cycle moved and the smaller firm's offer sat unanswered in her inbox. Zuri's breath was slow and even. The crayon drawing on the kitchen table showed a woman in a cape with a folder under her arm, labeled in 6-year-old handwriting, "Mommy at work." Adaeze sat with the question long enough to answer it honestly. Yes. Not because it was easy, because it was the only answer she could give Zuri with her whole chest. She called the smaller firm the next morning and negotiated a start date 6 weeks out. Enough time to testify. On a Tuesday morning in late winter, Adaeze walked up the stone steps of the state capitol building. The light came in low and pale over the limestone, the kind of winter light that makes everything look like it is being documented. Celestine walked beside her, reading glasses on the beaded chain her mother had brought from Accra, her briefcase in her right hand. Adaeze carried the documentation folder. Inside the legislative chamber, the wood paneling absorbed the fluorescent light. The audience settled. Adaeze sat down at the witness table. She opened the folder. The first page was the matched resume data. The second page was Loretta's folder, 30 years of rejection letters, now copied and entered into the public record. She adjusted the microphone. She looked up. She did not raise her voice once. That was the detail people remembered afterward. The ones who were in the chamber, and the ones who watched the recorded feed later that evening. Adaeze Okafor sat at the witness table before the State Labor and Employment Committee on a Tuesday morning in late winter, her documentation folder open in front of her, and she spoke the way she had always spoken when it mattered most. In complete sentences, with precision, at a pace that did not allow for misunderstanding. She began with methodology. 12 weeks. 47 matched resume pairs. Identical qualifications, identical experience, identical formatting. The only variables were name and zip code. She laid the response rate data on the record. Candidates with black identifying names received initial screening responses at a rate 3.4 times lower than their matched counterparts. The algorithm, she explained, was not a neutral tool. It was a decision made by people, sold by a company, and adopted without disparate impact review. The discrimination required no individual intent. It only required no one asking the question. Then she opened to the second section of the folder. She said, "This is a record compiled by Loretta Okafor, My mother. Over 30 years of employment applications submitted between 1987 and 2017. Rejection letters. Non-responses. Positions she was qualified for and did not receive. She is 61 years old. She worked as a hospital administrator for the last 20 years of her career. These letters predate algorithmic screening. They are the pattern that the algorithm inherited. The chamber went quiet, in the way that rooms go quiet when something has shifted and everyone present knows it simultaneously. The committee chair, a woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses she kept removing and replacing, looked down at her own copy of the documentation. She did not speak for a moment. Adaeze continued, "I am not here because I was wronged. I am here because the record shows a pattern, and a pattern requires a policy response, not a personal apology." The committee chair looked up. She asked about the algorithm's vendor, the name of the firm that built and sold the screening tool. Adaeze had been waiting for that question. The vendor, she said, was a workforce technology company called Meridian Talent Systems. Harwick Lorne was not their only client. According to procurement records obtained through public disclosure requests, Meridian's screening tool had been licensed to 23 companies operating in the state, across financial services, healthcare administration, and commercial real estate. The tool was the same. The disparate impact, she said, was almost certainly the same. The committee chair wrote something down. What followed took 4 months. The State Labor and Employment Committee introduced the Algorithmic Hiring Transparency Act, requiring any company using automated screening tools to disclose the criteria those tools applied, to conduct mandatory disparate impact audits before deployment and annually thereafter, and to maintain human review protocols at every stage where an application could be eliminated. The bill passed in a late spring session with bipartisan support, which Celestine described in her precise way as unusual and therefore important. Harwick Lorne entered a court-monitored consent agreement with the EEOC. The agreement required full restructuring of the HR department, mandatory bias training with external auditors, a 3-year monitoring period, and a community reinvestment fund directed toward workforce development programs in the zip codes their algorithm had systematically filtered out. Prescott Vane did not return from administrative leave. Deshaun Pittard, the internal HR analyst who had flagged the algorithm's outputs 18 months earlier and been quietly reassigned, was reinstated to his original position with full back pay. His written complaint, which had been filed and never formally acknowledged, was entered into the consent agreement as supporting documentation. He gave a brief statement to Brenique, who published it in a follow-up piece. He said, "I knew what I was looking at. I just needed someone else to be able to prove it." Loretta's folder was entered into the official legislative record as Exhibit C in the supporting documentation for the Algorithmic Hiring Transparency Act. Her name appeared in the record as Loretta Adaeze Okafor, contributing witness, 30 years of silence acknowledged in an official document. Adaeze called her mother when she saw the final record published online. Loretta did not say much. She said, "Good. That is the right word for it." On an evening in late October, Adaeze came home to Zuri drawing at the kitchen table. The apartment smelled like oatmeal from breakfast and something Loretta had left in the slow cooker. Zuri's crayons were spread across half the table. Adaeze set her bag down and stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment, watching her daughter's hand move across the page with the particular seriousness of a 6-year-old who is doing something that matters to her. She went to the bedroom. The blazer was still on the closet door, where it had been since February, pressed and ready. The interview blazer she had put on and taken off more times than she could count in the last 2 years. She took it off the hanger. She did not throw it away. She hung it in the back of the closet, behind the winter coats, where things go when you no longer need them for the purpose they were meant for. She went back to the kitchen. Zuri held up the drawing. A woman standing at a microphone. No cape this time. No folder. Just standing, both feet on the ground, looking forward. Adaeze put it on the refrigerator. If you have sent the application and heard nothing back, I am not telling you it was your fault. I am telling you we now have the data to prove it wasn't.